I am Sera Willow, 34 years old, from Florida, and the night I caught my husband and my best friend whispering about me in our living room, something in me broke that has never healed the same way again. It started quietly. Too quietly. The air conditioner hummed in the background, the TV was off, and the faint smell of my favorite vanilla candle filled the house. I had just come home early from a client meeting. My shoes in hand, my steps careful. I wasn't sneaking. I just didn't want to interrupt. But then I heard my name. "Sarah's so paranoid lately," my husband Daniel said, his voice low but mocking. "She thinks everyone's against her." And then came laughter. Her laughter. Clara, my best friend since college, the woman who stood beside me at my wedding, who helped me decorate this very house. "Oh, please," she said between giggles. She's been that way for years. You know how she gets dramatic, emotional. It's cute, though. You just have to handle her right. "Handle her?" Daniel echoed, smirking. "You make it sound like she's a problem." "She is sometimes," Clara said. "She told me she doesn't trust you lately. I told her she was just overthinking again." That's when I realized what was happening. My secrets. My insecurities, the things I had whispered to Clara in confidence. They were entertainment to them. My throat went dry. I pressed my hand to the wall to steady myself. Have you ever experienced this kind of betrayal? Share your story in the comments, and subscribe if you believe no one should be treated this way. Clara's voice softened. "She really does love you, though. She's just fragile." "Fragile," Daniel repeated, laughing under his breath. That's one word for it. Every word cut deeper. They weren't talking about some stranger. They were dissecting me, the woman who had stood by both of them through everything. I peeked around the corner, my pulse thundering. Clara sat on the couch, legs tucked beneath her, holding one of my wine glasses. Her fingers, with nails I'd painted for her just last week, traced the rim lazily. Daniel sat opposite her, leaning forward, eyes bright in that way that once used to be only for me. My stomach twisted. The space between them was charged, too familiar, too close. "How do you know so much about her?" Daniel asked. Clara smirked. "Because she tells me everything." "She always has." He leaned back. "That's dangerous, isn't it?" "Only if you give me a reason to use it," she teased. The air seemed to collapse around me. I took a step back, too fast. The floor creaked. Both their heads turned toward the hallway. "Sera?" Daniel called. My heart pounded so loud I thought it would give me away. I forced my voice steady. "Yeah, it's me." I walked in slowly, pretending nothing was wrong. My face burned. I smiled. The kind of smile you wear when you know the stage is burning but you have to finish your line anyway. "You're home early," Clara said, setting her glass down too quickly. "Traffic was light," I said. "Didn't want to waste a Friday night out." Daniel stood, his expression unreadable. "We were just talking about you." "Oh?" I said, forcing a laugh. "What about me?" Clara glanced at him, then back at me, her eyes darting. "Just how stressed you've been lately." "Right," I said. "Stress." I turned to Daniel. "Funny how it seems to be contagious." He frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," I said, my smile sharp. "Just an observation." I sat down, poured myself a glass from the same bottle of wine, and watched them squirm. It was almost satisfying in a sick way, seeing them stumble for words, unsure how much I'd heard. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Clara stood abruptly, muttering something about leaving. "Don't," I said. "Please stay. We're all friends here, right?" Her face went pale. After she left, Daniel tried to act normal. "You're overreacting, Sera," he said, his tone clipped. "You always think people are against you." I laughed, the kind of laugh that cracks. "And you always think you're smarter than me." He sighed, exasperated. "You're imagining things again. Clara was just trying to help." I stared at him. "By telling you my secrets?" He froze. "So you did hear us?" "Yes," I said softly. "And I wish I hadn't." He rubbed his temples. "Sera, she's your friend. Don't make this into something it's not." I stepped closer. "You mean like the way you made me into something I'm not? Paranoid, fragile, dramatic?" His silence was all the answer I needed. That night, I lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling while he slept soundly. My mind replayed every memory, every lunch date with Clara, every comforting text, every time she told me, "You can tell me anything." And I had. I'd told her about the distance in my marriage, about my fears that Daniel had stopped loving me, about how I sometimes felt invisible, and she had fed those words straight to him. My secrets had become her currency. The two people I trusted most had built a private world out of my vulnerability, one where I was the punchline. By morning, something inside me had changed. I looked at Daniel brushing his teeth, humming, acting like nothing had happened, and I realized he didn't deserve my tears. Neither of them did. What they did deserve was a lesson they'd never forget. I walked out of the bathroom and caught my reflection in the mirror. Eyes red, jaw clenched, a woman on the edge of ruin. But beneath that ruin was something else, something sharper. Resolve. They thought they'd broken me. They had no idea they'd just awakened the version of me that no one had ever seen before. Looking back, the signs were always there. I just didn't want to believe them. When you love people, when you truly trust them, you give them the benefit of every doubt. You excuse the odd looks, the overlapping stories, the quiet changes in tone. You tell yourself they would never do that to you, but they did. I remember the first time I saw Clara's name flash on Daniel's phone. It was late, almost midnight. He was sitting on the couch, claiming to finish work emails. When I asked who it was, he didn't even hesitate. Clara? She needed advice about a client. At the time, it made sense. Clara was starting a small design business, and Daniel was an accountant. I even felt proud of him for helping her. "Tell her she owes you dinner," I joked. He smiled faintly. "I think she'd say you owe me dinner for letting me help her," I laughed. If I had known what kind of dinner they'd end up sharing, I wouldn't have smiled so easily. Have you ever experienced this kind of betrayal? Share your story in the comments, and subscribe if you believe no one should be treated this way. The friendship between Daniel and Clara grew in plain sight. They texted often, shared inside jokes, even tagged each other on social media posts that I wasn't part of. "Don't be jealous," Clara would say, laughing when I teased her about it. "I'm not jealous," I'd reply. "Just wondering when my invitation to the group chat expires." They'd laugh, and I'd laugh too, pretending it didn't sting. But it did. Sometimes, I'd walk into a room and find them sitting closer than they should have been, voices dropping just before I entered. I'd tell myself I was being silly, paranoid, fragile, the word. Clara loved to use when she wanted to dismiss my feelings without sounding cruel. There was a day at the beach that now plays in my memory like a cruel film reel. It was a Sunday in late June, the kind of bright Florida afternoon where everything feels too real to be fake. The three of us had gone together. Clara wore that blue swimsuit that always drew attention. I remember how Daniel complimented it. "That color suits you," he'd said, eyes lingering a bit too long. I laughed it off, but inside I felt a shift. Later, while I was in the water, I turned to wave at them, and froze. They were sitting close, their heads bent together, whispering. His hand brushed hers, and she didn't move away. When they noticed me looking, Clara jumped up and waved enthusiastically. "Come back. We're talking about where to eat." Her voice was too bright, too quick. I swam back in silence, salt water stinging my eyes in ways that had nothing to do with the ocean. Weeks passed like that. Small humiliations disguised as accidents. Clara started dressing differently when she came over. Less casual, more deliberate. Makeup done, perfume lingering in the hall. I remember teasing her once. "Big plans after dinner?" She smiled, flicking her hair. "Maybe. Or maybe I just like looking nice." Daniel had looked up from his phone, smirked, and said, "You always look nice, Clara." It was supposed to be harmless, but I caught the flicker of something in her eyes. Pride. And I hated that I noticed. The worst part was how they made me question myself. Every instinct I had screamed that something was wrong. But every time I tried to speak up, Daniel twisted it into proof that I was the problem. "Do you hear yourself?" he'd say. "You're accusing your best friend of flirting with your husband? That's insane, Sera." Then Clara would chime in, her voice soft and sympathetic. "Sera, honey, you're tired. You've been so stressed lately. Maybe you just need to take a break." They made me doubt my own eyes, my own mind. That's how betrayal works. It doesn't just break your trust. It makes you break it yourself. One night, I remember waking up to find Daniel gone. It was 2 a.m. His phone was still on the dresser, but his keys were missing. I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe he'd gone out for air. Maybe he couldn't sleep. But then I saw the glow from his smartwatch on the nightstand, the screen lighting up with a notification. Message from Clara. My breath caught. I picked up the watch, scrolling through the recent notifications. There were dozens, little snippets of late-night chats. Clara, I can't stop thinking about tonight. Daniel, we shouldn't, but I can't stop either. Clara, she has no idea. I almost feel bad. Almost. That word tore through me. Almost. It meant she knew exactly what she was doing and didn't care enough to stop. Daniel returned half an hour later. I pretended to be asleep, though my heart hammered in my chest. I felt the bed dip as he climbed in beside me, the faint smell of perfume clinging to him, her perfume. He sighed, turned over, and fell asleep easily. Meanwhile, I lay awake, replaying every conversation, every smile, every moment of trust that now felt like mockery. In the days that followed, I watched them more closely. I became an observer in my own life, quiet, calculating. When Clara called, I noted the times. When Daniel stepped out, I checked his calendar. When either of them mentioned the other, I studied their tone, and slowly, the puzzle formed itself. The work dinners Daniel attended twice a week always aligned with the evenings Clara's social media went dark. The emergency client meetings he claimed to attend matched perfectly with her spontaneous self-care nights. It wasn't paranoia. It was pattern, and once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. The day before it all came crashing down, Clara came over with takeout, my favorite sushi, her peace offering after sensing the distance between us. She placed the bag on the counter, smiling too widely. "You've been so busy lately, Sera. I miss our girls' nights." I forced a smile. "Me too. Though I'm surprised you had time for me, with Daniel's business keeping you so involved." Her hand froze midair. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," I said, shrugging. "You just seem very invested in his success." She laughed, but it was nervous. "He's your husband. Of course I want him to do well." "Right," I said. "Of course." That night, when she left, I followed her from a distance. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white, and when I saw her car pull into the parking lot of Daniel's office, after hours, lights dim, I knew the truth. All the whispers, the smiles, the inside jokes, they weren't friendship. They were foreplay, and I was done pretending I didn't see it. By the time I pulled back into my driveway, my tears had dried into something colder, something sharper. If they wanted to play games behind my back, I'd make sure they learned who they were playing with. The woman they thought was fragile was about to become their biggest mistake. The night I found undeniable proof wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, almost eerily so, like the air itself knew something terrible was about to happen. Daniel had left early that morning for what he claimed was a client meeting in Miami. Clara texted me later, saying she'd be out of town visiting her cousin. I didn't question either of them. Not anymore. I had already learned that the truth doesn't hide in words. It hides in what people don't say. In pauses, in the way their eyes shift, in stories that almost make sense. So, that evening, instead of going home after work, I drove to Daniel's office. The parking lot was half empty. Only one car stood out under the dim orange streetlight, Clara's silver sedan. My chest tightened, but I didn't cry. Not this time. I parked a few spaces away, turned off my engine, and watched. For a long time, nothing happened. Then, through the window blinds, I saw them. Daniel and Clara, laughing, leaning close over his desk. His hand brushed her hair back, fingers lingering at her neck. She didn't move away. He kissed her, and she kissed him back. I didn't feel rage. I didn't scream. I didn't even move. I just sat there, staring, as the final piece of my denial shattered. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't emotional support. It was betrayal. Deliberate, intimate, cruel. My body went cold, then hot, then cold again. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned pale. They had taken my trust and carved their laughter into it. When I finally drove away, the road blurred beneath me. Streetlights streaked through my tears, painting gold lines across my windshield. I barely remember getting home, only the emptiness that followed. Inside, the house felt like a stranger's. Every picture frame, every scent, every object was tainted. The wine glass Clara had once used still sat on the shelf, its faint fingerprint mocking me. I wanted to smash it. I wanted to burn the entire house down, but something stronger than rage held me still. Clarity. Because in that moment, I realized something important. I had been predictable my entire life. Emotional, honest, loyal to a fault. They knew I'd cry, shout, forgive, but what they didn't know was that I could change. I sat at the dining table and made a list. A cold, methodical list of every way they had wronged me, every secret I knew, every advantage I had. They had underestimated me. That was going to be their downfall. The next morning, Daniel came home, pretending nothing had happened. His tie was loose, his smile lazy, his eyes bright in a way that disgusted me. "Morning," he said, leaning down to kiss my forehead. I turned my face away. "Where were you?" "Miami," he said casually. "Didn't I tell you? I stayed overnight. Clients wanted to go over some numbers." "Numbers," I repeated. "Right," he frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I hope your client appreciates late-night strategy sessions," I said evenly. His eyes narrowed. "Sera, what's going on?" "Nothing," I said, forcing a smile. "Just making sure we're still telling the same lies." He blinked, taken aback. "You're not making sense." "I'm making perfect sense," I said quietly. "You just don't like that I finally see through you," he scoffed. "You're paranoid. Clara told me you've been acting off again. Maybe you should talk to someone." I stood abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. "Do not use her name in this house again." He raised his hands. "Okay, calm down." "Don't tell me to calm down," I snapped. "You have no right to that word anymore." For the first time, I saw a flicker of guilt in his expression. Small, but real. He opened his mouth to speak, then stopped himself. I walked past him, my heart hammering. "Breakfast's on the counter," I said coldly. "You'll need your strength." He didn't ask why. The next few days were strange. I went through the motions of normal life, work, errands, polite conversations, but everything felt detached, like I was moving through fog. Clara tried to text me. I ignored her. She called once, twice, then stopped. Maybe Daniel had warned her. Maybe she felt the shift. Either way, it didn't matter, because by then, I had already decided what had to be done. The real breaking point came 3 nights later. Daniel fell asleep early, his phone left unlocked on the nightstand. I don't know if it was carelessness or arrogance, but I took it as an invitation. I scrolled through their messages, heart steady, eyes sharp. "Clara, when will you tell her?" "Daniel, soon. She's been distant." "Clara, she knows. I can feel it." "Daniel, then we'll handle it. She always breaks down eventually." Those words cut deeper than the sight of them together. She always breaks down. They didn't fear my reaction. They expected it. They thought I'd cry, beg, crumble. But not this time. This time, I'd make sure they were the ones who broke. The next morning, I began my quiet war. I started with small things, rearranging Daniel's files, moving his car keys, subtly changing details in his calendar invites. Nothing major, just enough to make him question himself. Then I reached out to a lawyer I'd once helped with a charity project. I told her I needed confidential advice. She agreed to meet the next day. When I told her everything, the affair, the deception, the emotional manipulation, she didn't pity me. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "Good. Use it." That was the moment I stopped being the victim. That evening, I stood by the window, watching the sunset bleed across the Florida sky. Daniel's car pulled into the driveway. My reflection in the glass didn't look broken anymore. It looked dangerous. He came inside, smiling like nothing had changed. "Hey, babe, thinking takeout tonight?" I turned, smiling back. "Sure, you choose." He relaxed instantly, relieved that the storm seemed over. But what he didn't know was that the calm he felt was the silence before lightning hits. Because now, every word, every smile, every plan I made was part of something bigger, the slow, deliberate undoing of everything they had built. They thought they'd seen the worst of me. They hadn't seen anything yet. That night, when Daniel fell asleep, I whispered to the dark, "You wanted to handle me. Let's see how you handle the truth." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. And for the first time in months, I slept peacefully, because I knew the next chapter of my life wouldn't be about pain anymore. It would be about power. The apartment looked different in the daylight. Sunlight found each speck of dust, every crooked picture frame, the faint lipstick stain on a wine glass I'd never washed away because I wanted to remember the moment I'd first suspected. Now that stain felt like an accusation. After the confrontation, there were no scenes. I went to work, answered emails, ate lunch at my desk. On the surface, I functioned. Inside, something unraveled. At night, the house felt cavernous. I stood in the doorway and listened for ordinary noises that used to mean comfort. The hum of the AC, pans in the kitchen, Daniel humming while he cooked. Those sounds had been background music. Now, every sound recalled absence. I started waking at 3 a.m. The hours between 3 and 5 are dangerous, when your brain invents worst cases. Those hours filled with Clara's laugh, Daniel's hand at her back, messages that implied a life I was not part of. I tried calling my sister once, rehearsing words in the shower. I hung up. I wasn't ready to make someone else hold my unraveling. So I shut the curtains and let the city pulse without me. Days blurred. I slept too much or not at all. I watered plants I'd bought for us, wiped down counters, left a slice of cake in the fridge from a birthday he barely remembered. The cake sat untouched, because eating it felt like betraying the version of myself who still believed. Work became refuge and burden. Clients depended on me. Deadlines didn't care about heartbreak. I took calls between silent sobs in the restroom and returned to speak about budgets. The dissonance was exhausting. A few colleagues noticed and offered time off. I declined. Telling them felt like shoving private thunder into a public room. I feared admitting I'd misread people I loved. Sometimes loneliness felt physical. I made 2 cups of tea and set one on the table, not for company but because 2 cups made the world less singular. I pressed my thumb to the rim and remembered little kindnesses that had been weapons and comforts alike. I went back to the office late one night to comb through files. The building was nearly empty. Under fluorescent light, I unfolded the small ledger where I'd started cataloging evidence. Dates, times, notes. The discipline steadied me, but discipline isn't palliation. I cried on the couch until my throat was raw, then slept with clothes on, the TV murmuring. At 3 a.m., I'd wake thinking of Daniel laughing with Clara while I sliced our wedding cake alone. The worst moments were trivial but sharp. A pair of his shoes by the door, the seam of his shirt in the closet, a note tucked into a book. Each remnant felt like glass. Clara called one rainy afternoon. "Sera, I miss you. Can we talk?" she asked, voice easy and practiced. I listened to the rain and said, "Not yet." She accepted it. That acceptance cut differently than denial. I slept in the guest room some nights to distance myself from places that stored happiness. Changing pillowcases, moving picture frames, small rituals that felt like amending my life story. I bought a new bedside lamp whose light was softer, as if gentleness could soothe a mind on fire. Friends texted invitations. I ignored most. When I did go out, I watched them watch me. They wanted to fix me with chatter, but grief doesn't fit into brunch topics. Therapy was something I postponed out of pride. But the day I found Clara's lipstick on a glass, a bright crimson smudge, I called. The lipstick was impossible to ignore, a catalog of choices I hadn't made. The therapist's office smelled of tea and pens. She didn't gasp. She asked one simple question. "What do you want, Sera?" I said, to stop being a character in other people's lives. I wanted to be seen on my terms. She helped me name the toxins: minimization, gaslighting, triangulation. Once named, I could locate the abuses. I began setting boundaries, small things at first, like not answering Daniel during work. He noticed. "You're distant," he said. "Are you going to leave me?" I answered, "I'm taking care of myself." Strength isn't a single act. It's a ledger of choices. Eating alone, sleeping in another room, keeping evidence safe. Each choice made me less dependent on someone else's story. Sometimes I failed. I opened the locked drawer with copies of messages and let the stack tremble in my hands. I read words meant for another and blurred. Then I locked the drawer and ran until the city blurred into anonymity. Some mornings, an ordinary object would feel like evidence. I'd open the closet and find a dress that smelled faintly of his cologne. I kept it folded, touching the fabric and remembering how we'd laughed the night we bought it. Memory made it heavier. Once I found a tiny note tucked in a cookbook. "Call me tonight." It might have been a simple reminder. It might have been a breadcrumb. I slid it into my pocket and walked around the house, pretending the weight wasn't there. Friends invited me out. I went sometimes, because stillness at home felt like drowning. At a rooftop party, I watched couples sway and felt a sharp, hollow ache. I stepped to the terrace and breathed until my sight steadied. A friend asked if I was okay. I smiled and said yes. The truth would have been too heavy for small talk. Clara's texts arrived in patterns. Coy apologies, casual check-ins, then silence. I saved each one. I didn't reply. The act of saving felt like control. Gradually, the solitude taught me patience. I learned to hold grief and a plan at once, observing their rhythms, the times Clara stopped posting, the nights Daniel's calendar filled with client dinners, became research rather than obsession. I measured rather than exploded. Isolation sharpened me. It turned pain into precision. It taught me to act while my enemies slept, and to protect my life with quiet, steady choices. Isolation taught me precision. It taught me to measure my anger in actions rather than words, to make plans while my enemies slept. A plan was forming. The first time I felt something like strength again was almost accidental. It happened on an ordinary Wednesday morning when Daniel forgot to log out of his laptop before leaving for work. The computer screen lit up as I passed the kitchen table. Open inbox, unread messages, familiar names. My pulse surged. My hand trembled above the mouse, but I forced myself to breathe. Not from guilt, from control. Inside his emails was everything I needed. Confirmation of late-night hotel reservations under his company account, duplicate expense receipts, and messages to Clara that were no longer flirtatious but logistical. Tomorrow, same place. Delete this thread. She's starting to suspect. Each word felt like a brick added to a wall I could finally see in full. For months I'd been building this picture in fragments. Now the edges met. The lies had a structure, and that meant I could dismantle it piece by piece. I copied everything to a flash drive. For the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was planning. That night, I drove to the beach. The waves were heavy and gray, the wind whipping through my hair. I stood there with the flash drive in my hand, thinking of how powerless I'd felt before. Power isn't loud, I realized. It's quiet. It's when you know something they don't. The next morning, I called my lawyer again. "I'm ready," I said simply. She didn't ask what had changed. She only replied, "Then let's begin." For weeks, I had been collecting evidence, financial inconsistencies, suspicious texts, Clara's business registrations. With my lawyer's help, I discovered something I hadn't expected. Daniel had funneled part of our shared savings into Clara's failing business to help her recover from bad investments. He had used our money to finance her ambitions. That discovery shifted everything. It was no longer just emotional betrayal. It was legal. My lawyer guided me through the process carefully. We documented every transfer, every invoice. You don't need confrontation, she said. You need leverage. I started keeping two faces, the one Daniel saw, calm and almost apologetic, and the one that emerged when I was alone, cold and precise. At home, I cooked dinner, smiled when he spoke, asked about his day. He thought I was softening. He had no idea that while he talked, I recorded, documented, archived. The loneliness of the previous weeks transformed into something sharper. Focus. I joined a gym again, not for fitness, but for discipline. I needed a routine that belonged only to me. The repetition of movement felt like reclaiming my own rhythm. Sometimes I'd see Clara at the cafe near my office, pretending not to notice me. Her laughter rang false now, hollow. She'd look up, and our eyes would meet for a fraction of a second. She'd look away first, always. That was its own kind of victory. One Friday, my lawyer and I met at her office to finalize what she called the opening move. Divorce papers. But not ordinary ones. Ones backed by evidence that could ruin Daniel's career. She handed me the folder. Once this is filed, he'll understand exactly what you know. Are you ready for that? I smiled faintly. I've been ready since the night I stopped crying. Still, part of me hesitated. Revenge and justice were different beasts, but they wore similar faces. I wasn't sure which one I was feeding. That night, Daniel came home late again. I greeted him with his favorite meal, pasta, wine, candlelight. The performance almost made me sick, but I played it perfectly. You're in a good mood, he said, suspicious. I decided to stop being angry, I replied. He relaxed, even smiled. Good. I missed this version of you. I looked at him across the table, the man who once vowed to protect me, now the one I was dismantling piece by piece. Did you? I asked softly. He nodded. Of course, I smiled. Then I guess it's only fair I return the favor. He frowned. Confused, but I poured him more wine. The next morning, the papers were delivered. Clara called within the hour. Sera, she began, voice tight. What are you doing? What do you mean? I asked, my tone light. Daniel said you filed for divorce, with claims about fraud. Are you out of your mind? Out of my mind, I echoed. No, Clara. For the first time, I'm in it. She tried to sound composed. You're making a mistake. You can't prove anything. Oh, but I can, I said, my voice steady. And when this reaches court, you'll see just how much I can prove. There was silence on the other end, a silence that tasted like fear. Then she muttered, You'll regret this. I smiled to myself. Maybe, but you'll regret it first. That evening, Daniel confronted me. Why are you doing this? He demanded. I didn't answer right away. I looked him straight in the eyes, and for the first time he flinched. You did this, I said. All I did was stop pretending not to see. He tried to twist it back on me. You're destroying everything we built! I laughed, a real bitter laugh. You built this on lies. I'm just clearing the rubble. When he realized he couldn't intimidate me, he changed tactics. You won't win, Sera. You don't know how ruthless the world can be. Oh, Daniel, I said softly. I've been living in your world for years. I know exactly how ruthless it is. That night, I opened a fresh notebook and began a new list. Not of their wrongs, but of my wins. Each day, I wrote one thing I'd reclaimed. Peace, sleep, control, truth. Every entry was a reminder that power isn't something given. It's something taken back. As the days passed, I could feel my old self fading, the one who begged to be understood, who softened every blow. She was gone now. What replaced her was not cruel, but clear. They had stolen my voice. Now I was learning to make it echo. I learned early that the best revenge is patient. It waits, it watches, and it moves quietly so the other person never sees the hand guiding the fall. After I filed the papers and felt the first tremors of panic ripple through their circle, I understood I had to be meticulous. Anger had gotten me here. Discipline would finish it. Marla warned me not to broadcast anything. People want drama, she said, but you need precision. So I stopped telling friends every little victory. I told only Ava, who promised to be my eyes and ears when I needed them. She became the friend who could distance herself and still care. The first thing I did was secure the house. I changed passwords on shared accounts, moved important documents to a locked safe deposit box, and made sure my phone and email were on separate private channels he could not access. A locked door is a small comfort when everything else feels open. Next was the practical work. I hired a private investigator. I told him exactly what I wanted: patterns, receipts, times, proof. Within a week, he delivered a binder that smelled faintly of office paper and truth. Hotel receipts matched dates when Daniel said he was with clients. Pictures showed late-night meetings. Names lined up in ways that made the story undeniable. I took that binder to Marla, and we sat in her office with the blinds half closed. She flipped through the pages like someone examining a crime scene. "We'll file these as exhibits," she said. "But also, we'll use them to warn partners and clients who should not be involved with a man who behaves this way." It wasn't just about humiliation. It was about consequences. He had walked through my life as if nothing had been at stake. Now, there were stakes. While Marla alerted the right people discreetly, I worked on the softer parts of the plan. I reconnected with Clara's circle subtly. The women who liked the same salon posts, the friends who commented on her photos. I didn't show anger. I showed curiosity. When you appear harmless, you learn more. At a local cafe, I met a client of Clara's, Elise, who had paid a large deposit for a renovation that had stalled. She was frustrated and ready to pull the plug. I offered advice, gentle questions about timelines and invoices, and she forwarded receipts that didn't match the work. Promised. I compiled those emails into a neat folder and passed them to Marla. Each inconsistency added to the case. When you're systematic, coincidences become patterns. Patterns become proof. At home, I kept my face gentle. I cooked Daniel meals he liked, asked about his day, and listened in the way I had before the betrayal. He relaxed when he thought the house had returned to normal. People show their true selves when they are comfortable. That's when they leave traces. I also used professional pieces of his life as pressure points. I reached out to a former colleague through LinkedIn, someone I'd met once. He mentioned a firm that valued clean bookkeeping. I didn't need to threaten. I only needed to remind people what professionalism required. Technology helped. I scheduled a few posts under an alias to nudge a narrative. A woman's voice asking questions about fair business conduct, a comment highlighting integrity, a subtle mention of client transparency. Nothing accusatory, just questions. Questions seed doubt. As the weeks passed, I watched the dominoes line up. Daniel missed a client dinner because he stayed out late. The client mentioned it to a partner. Clara's postponed projects led clients to ask for refunds. One email led to another, and fractures widened until they were cracks. I remember the night I planted the last piece. It was late. Rain tapped at the window. Marla had secured a witness in a transaction where a payment meant for Clara's business was routed through a shell account tied to a vendor Daniel recommended. It was ugly and undeniable. Marla quietly sent copies to a partner at his firm, a primary client, and the bank compliance desk. The phrase possible misconduct travels faster than you think. The next morning I made coffee while Daniel scrolled his phone. He looked up. "You okay?" he asked. I smiled. "Yes, why do you ask?" "You seem different." "Maybe I am," I said. "Maybe I finally stopped being the person you thought I was." That afternoon, a message arrived for him. His face drained. He scrolled. The words blurred in my memory. "We need to talk about recent transactions." He looked up at me, eyes wide. The trap had been set. It didn't need noise to work. Law and finance would do the rest. I met Ava one evening and told her the broad strokes. She listened without flinching. "We'll be careful," she said. "If things get messy, I'll back you." It meant more than she knew. A week later, I sat with Elise, Clara's client, in a quiet cafe. She showed me invoices, photos of unfinished work, messages where promises dissolved into excuses. She kept saying it would be done next week, Elise said, voice small. I told her, keep everything. Save every text. She left the cafe clutching her phone like a lifeline. Marla mapped out the timing. Notify partners quietly, she advised. Let them see the evidence before the rumor mill starts. Reputation is brittle. I read the list of names and felt a new kind of calm. This was work, not spectacle. At home, I kept my face soft. I cooked, I asked about his day, and I cataloged small slips, late receipts, odd meetings, messages that disappeared. I journaled the details, dates, and amounts until the collection became undeniable. When the partners started asking questions, and a client requested clearer invoices, it was not a triumph but a relief. It meant the pattern had been noticed. It meant my careful work was translating into consequence. I learned that setting a trap is as much about patience as precision. It is sitting at a table and being present, even when every part of you wants to explode. It is making phone calls at 3 a.m. and sleeping 2 hours at a time because the mind is busy with planning. It is watching someone you loved unravel and making sure the truth is what unravels them, not rumor. The weeks before the exposure were exhausting and taut. I breathed differently, measured my words, and kept a low profile. I smiled when neighbors waved, and I cried in the car alone when needed. It was brutal and necessary. They'd used me as amusement. Now, they would learn the cost of underestimating the woman they betrayed. I watched the truth begin to loosen its hold. The morning the first story broke, the Florida sky was an endless, merciless blue. Sunlight poured across the kitchen tiles, and for a moment, the world looked too calm for what was happening behind the scenes. I stirred my coffee slowly, almost ceremonially, while Daniel's phone buzzed across the counter. Once, twice, 3 times. He reached for it, then froze. His shoulders stiffened. What the hell? The headline stared back at him from the screen. Local firm under investigation for financial misconduct. My heart didn't race. It beat with steady purpose. He turned toward me, pale. Did you know about this? I looked up from my mug. Know about what? He ran a hand through his hair. They're saying there's been an anonymous report. Someone tipped off the partners about misuse of company accounts. It's ridiculous. I tilted my head slightly. Is it? He blinked, searching my face. You think I had something to do with this? I shrugged. I think people are finally starting to see you clearly. The silence between us was fragile, like glass stretched too thin. He stared at me, jaw tight, but he couldn't find the right words, because deep down, he knew. The trap had sprung, and it was working exactly as I'd planned. By noon, his phone wouldn't stop ringing. His firm had launched a full audit, and one of the major clients, the one I'd quietly informed through my lawyer, had frozen all contracts pending review. He left the house in a rush, muttering curses under his breath. When the door slammed, I let out the breath I'd been holding for weeks. For the first time, I felt free, but I wasn't finished. That afternoon, I paid Clara a visit. Her shop, Clara Designs, sat in a neat strip of boutiques near downtown. The display window still showed glossy photos of luxury interiors, none of which she'd actually finished. The bell above the door chimed as I stepped inside. She looked up from behind the counter. The color drained from her face. Sera, she said slowly, what are you doing here? I smiled faintly. I thought it was time we talked. It's been, months since you betrayed me? Her eyes flicked toward the door. Please don't make a scene. Oh, don't worry, I said softly. The scene's already happening, just not here. I laid a folder on the counter, one with copies of her invoices, false transactions, client complaints. You might want to prepare a statement. The people you owe money to are about to see these. She went pale. Where did you get this? Let's just say karma keeps receipts. She tried to gather her voice. You think you can destroy me like this? I leaned forward. Destroy you? Clara, I didn't destroy you. You did that the moment you thought sleeping with my husband would make you more than my shadow. Her lip trembled, but I didn't let up. Do you know what the worst part was? I trusted you. I told you my fears, my doubts, my secrets. You turned them into pillow talk. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she whispered. Yes, you did, I said quietly. You just didn't think you'd get caught. I turned to leave, pausing at the door. Oh, and Clara? When the lawsuits start coming in, tell Daniel I said hello. That evening, Daniel stormed home. His tie was loosened, his eyes wild. "Did you do this?" he shouted. I looked up from my laptop, calm. "Do what?" "The audit. The anonymous complaints. Clara's clients dropping out. You're behind this." I smiled thinly. "It sounds like you're having a hard week. Stop playing dumb." He slammed his fist against the counter. "You're ruining my life." I stood slowly. "No, Daniel. I'm reminding you that I exist. You just forgot for a while." He glared at me, shaking his head. "You'll regret this. You think this makes you powerful? It just makes you cruel." "Cruel?" I said, stepping closer. "You want to talk about cruelty? You looked me in the eyes every night and lied. You made me think I was crazy while you shared my life with someone else. Don't mistake justice for cruelty." For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then he left, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. The sound didn't scare me. It liberated me. By the end of the week, Daniel's world began to collapse. His firm suspended him pending investigation. Clara's business page went offline after clients flooded her reviews with accusations. Photos of them together, smiling, perfect, started disappearing from social media. I didn't post anything. I didn't need to. People drew their own conclusions. I watched from the sidelines as their names spread through whispers and inboxes, as professional doors closed one by one. They had built their empire on deceit, and all I'd done was shine a light on it. That's the thing about truth. Once it's visible, it doesn't go back into the dark. One night, a message appeared on my phone. It was from Daniel. "Please, can we talk? You've made your point. I've lost everything." I stared at the message for a long time before replying. "You haven't lost everything, Daniel. You still have your conscience. If you can find it." Then I blocked his number. I sat in silence, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. My reflection in the window didn't look angry anymore, just resolved. Revenge didn't feel like I expected. It wasn't loud or euphoric. It was quiet. It was the peace of knowing I'd finally stopped begging for respect and demanded it instead. When I walked into the office the next day, a coworker smiled at me. "You look different," she said. "Do I?" "Yeah," she said. "You look free." I smiled, really smiled. "I am, and for the first time in months." I meant it. The strike was complete. But there was still one more act left, the reckoning. When the truth finally became public, it didn't arrive like a thunderstorm. It unfolded slowly. Whispers first, then headlines, then silence filled with judgment. By the time the world realized what Daniel and Clara had done, there was nothing left for them to defend. The damage was total, precise, and irreversible. It started with a leaked report from the firm's internal audit. Someone, most likely one of the senior partners, forwarded the findings to a journalist who covered corporate scandals. The article appeared on a Tuesday morning, its tone clinical and merciless. Financial advisor and design consultant under investigation for fraudulent transfers. The article was long and detailed, complete with documents that I recognized as the ones Marla and I had compiled. My lawyer had made sure that every fact was verifiable before it ever reached a reporter's inbox. There were no accusations, only evidence. By noon, Daniel's name trended online. His company released a statement announcing his indefinite suspension. Clara's design firm was tagged in dozens of comments, most of them angry clients demanding refunds. I didn't post anything. I didn't need to. The story spoke for itself. I remember sitting in my car that afternoon, parked outside the courthouse. The Florida heat pressed through the windshield, and I could see my reflection faintly in the glass. My face didn't look like the woman who once cried herself to sleep. It looked composed, deliberate, untouchable. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters. Cameras flashed as Daniel exited, escorted by 2 lawyers. He kept his head down, but his expression, tight, pale, cornered, was burned into my memory. A journalist shouted, "Mr. Willow, do you have a comment on the allegations?" He didn't answer. He just pushed through the noise, sweat glistening on his temples. For a fleeting second, his eyes met mine across the parking lot. Recognition flickered there. Shock, guilt, something else. He looked smaller somehow, like the version of him I'd built in my mind had been stripped away, leaving only the man who'd thought he could play with my heart, and never pay for it. I didn't look away. Clara tried to handle her downfall differently. She took to social media, posting a long message about false accusations and jealous individuals spreading lies. It didn't take long for the comments to turn against her. People she'd once charmed began sharing screenshots, unpaid invoices, and stories of her manipulation. A client posted side-by-side photos of a promised design and the incomplete reality, captioned, "This woman stole my money." Clara deleted her account 2 days later. Meanwhile, Daniel's firm released more details as they tried to salvage their reputation. The audit revealed months of improper transfers and unapproved loans disguised as consulting fees. His partners wanted to believe it was all a mistake, but the pattern was too clear. They contacted me for a statement, and I provided the truth, every transaction, every message. I didn't embellish. I didn't gloat. I simply handed them the evidence. Truth, I'd learned, is its own form of revenge. It doesn't need decoration. News spread fast in our town. Friends who had once pitied me now looked at me with quiet awe. Even neighbors who had whispered about my fragile marriage avoided meeting my eyes when they passed. At the grocery store, I overheard 2 women talking near the produce aisle. "She looked so perfect with him," one said. "I guess you never really know people." The other replied, "You know who I feel sorry for? His wife, poor thing," I smiled to myself. Poor thing. That label used to define me. Not anymore, I didn't feel sorry. I felt sovereign. A week later, Marla called. "It's done," she said. "The partners accepted the settlement. The firm's board has voted to terminate him with cause. You'll get full financial restitution. Clara's civil suits are being filed by 3 former clients." I exhaled, a sound halfway between relief and disbelief. "It's over?" "Legally, yes. Emotionally, that's your journey." She was right. There were no fireworks at the end, no dramatic music, just quiet, just the sound of balance being restored. A few nights later, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, Daniel stood there. He looked nothing like the man I had once married. His hair unkempt, suit wrinkled, eyes sunken from sleeplessness. "I just want to talk," he said softly. I crossed my arms. "You lost that privilege months ago." "Please," he said. "I need you to understand." "I understand perfectly," I interrupted. "You wanted control. You thought I'd stay broken. You thought I'd forgive because that's what I always did." He swallowed hard. "I didn't think it would end like this." "Neither did I said. "But here we are." He stepped closer, desperation flickering. "Do you hate me?" I met his gaze steadily. "No, Daniel. I don't hate you. Hate takes energy. I just stopped caring whether you existed." He flinched like I'd slapped him. For a moment, he looked as if he might argue, but then his shoulders sagged. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "Sorry," I repeated quietly. That word means nothing from a man who uses it only when the world stops applauding him. He nodded once, defeated, and walked away. When the door closed, I leaned against it, breathing slowly. There were no tears, just calm. I thought of Clara somewhere, probably trying to rebuild what little reputation she had left. Of Daniel, now unemployed, his career reduced to scandal and whispers. And then I thought of myself. Not the version who'd been betrayed, but the woman standing here now, alone but unbroken. A week later, I met Ava for lunch. She grinned when she saw me. "You look lighter." "I am," I said. "You did it, Sera. You really did it." I shook my head. "No, Ava, we did it. You stood by me when no one else believed me." "Thank you," she smiled. "So what's next?" I looked out the cafe window. The world outside was bright, full of movement. "Next," I said, "I live. I build something that's mine." Later that night, I stood on the balcony of my apartment. The air was warm, heavy with the scent of salt from the nearby ocean. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled softly, a reminder that storms end. But they also renew. I whispered to the wind. Not for Daniel, not for Clara, but for the woman I had been. "You survived," I said. "And you turned survival into justice." The sky didn't answer. But I didn't need it to. I had spoken it into truth. After everything collapsed, the lawsuits, the headlines, the whispered gossip that circled like vultures. There was silence. Not the kind born of peace, but the kind that follows an explosion. The dust settles. The air still smells like smoke, and you realize you're standing in the wreckage of what used to be your life. That's what the aftermath felt like. Daniel was gone. Clara had vanished too, likely hiding somewhere, avoiding reporters, clients, and creditors. The world that had once revolved around them no longer existed, and for the first time in years, neither did the version of me who needed to be chosen by anyone else. But when the adrenaline faded, what remained wasn't triumph. It was something quieter, something heavier. Freedom, I discovered, is strange. When you've lived for years in fear, deceit, and manipulation, the absence of it feels almost unnatural. The house was too quiet. My mornings too still. The silence that used to wound me now stared back like a stranger I didn't yet know how to love. I woke early every day, brewed coffee, and sat by the window, watching the sunrise stretch across the Florida sky. The same sun that had risen over every betrayal, every argument, every lie. It rose again, unchanged, indifferent. I thought winning would feel like victory. Instead, it felt like recovery, slow, deliberate, fragile. For a while, I didn't tell anyone what I was doing next. The people who once whispered about my pain had no right to witness my healing. So, I stayed quiet. I went back to therapy. My therapist smiled when I told her about everything that had happened. Not because she approved of revenge, but because she saw what it represented. "You finally chose yourself," she said. "Was it worth it?" I asked. She tilted her head. "That's the wrong question. The right one is, was it necessary?" It was. Every moment of it. Healing came in pieces. Small, sometimes unremarkable ones. Cooking for myself without setting 2 plates. Going to the grocery store and not avoiding his favorite foods. Watching movies without flinching at shared memories. I learned that moving on doesn't mean forgetting. It means letting the memories live in the past instead of inside your ribcage. There were nights when loneliness returned, sneaky and familiar. I'd lie awake and wonder if revenge had changed me too much, if, in taking back power, I'd lost some part of my softness. But then I'd remind myself, I didn't become cruel. I became clear, and clarity is a form of grace. One afternoon, I found an old photo album buried in a box, our wedding photos. I opened it slowly. My smile looked naive. His looked practiced. Clara was in the second row, her hand resting on my shoulder. The sight made my chest tighten, but not from heartbreak anymore, from understanding. That woman in the photo didn't know yet how strong she would have to become. She didn't know she'd someday burn down her own life to build a better one from the ashes. I closed the album, not out of bitterness, but peace. Some stories don't deserve to be retold. They deserve to be ended. I began writing again, something I hadn't done since before the marriage. Words poured out of me like confession. At first they were angry, raw, jagged, but over time they softened. Writing gave my pain form, shape, meaning. A local publication printed one of my essays, "When the people you love become strangers." I didn't use names. I didn't need to. The story was universal. People reached out, women, men, strangers, thanking me for giving language to what they'd never said aloud. That was the first time I felt purpose again. Not revenge. Not justice. Purpose. Months passed. The weather turned humid again, the kind of heavy summer air that sticks to your skin. I started teaching part-time at a community college, literature and creative writing. It was quiet work, but it filled me in a way that nothing else had. One evening after class, a student lingered behind. She was young, maybe 20, eyes bright but uncertain. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course." "How do you forgive someone who ruined your life?" I thought about it for a long moment. Then I said, "You don't forgive them to free them. You forgive them to stop carrying their story on your back." She nodded slowly, tears in her eyes. After she left, I sat alone in the empty classroom, staring at the chalk dust swirling in the air. I realized I just said something I finally believed. Sometimes, late at night, I still wondered where they were. Daniel, Clara. whether they ever regretted it, whether their worlds had stayed as broken as they left mine. But then I'd close my eyes and let the thought drift away. They no longer lived rent-free in my mind. The best revenge, I'd learned, isn't destroying someone else's life. It's building yours in a way that makes their absence irrelevant. I wasn't the same woman who'd once begged to be understood. I didn't crave closure anymore. I was closure. Ava came over one weekend, bringing wine and laughter. "You've changed," she said, studying me. "Good or bad?" "Neither. Just lighter." "Like you finally exhaled." I smiled. "Maybe I did." We sat on the porch watching the sky fade into a watercolor of pinks and golds. "You ever think about him?" she asked gently. "Sometimes," I said. "But not with hate. More like curiosity. Like you'd glance at an old scar and think, that used to hurt." She raised her glass. "To scars that don't define us." I clinked mine against hers. "To that." As the night deepened, I went inside, lit a candle, and stood by the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't flawless. She had lines under her eyes, a small scar on her wrist, and a faint sadness that time hadn't erased. But she was whole, and that wholeness was worth everything I'd lost. It's strange how healing doesn't announce itself. There's no grand moment, no fireworks, no applause. It just happens quietly, like sunrise slipping through the blinds. One day you wake up and realize that the ache in your chest isn't there anymore. The memories still exist, but they've lost their sharpness. That's where I am now. I don't wake up angry. I don't fall asleep wondering what they're doing. I just live. And that simple act feels like the most radical thing I've ever done. It's been a year since everything ended. I moved out of the house Daniel and I once shared and into a smaller apartment near the ocean. The sea has become my therapist, its rhythm steady, honest, and infinite. I walk the beach every morning, the sand cool beneath my feet, the gulls crying overhead like reminders of freedom. Sometimes I find myself smiling at nothing. Just the wind, the sky, the sound of waves, things that don't lie, things that don't leave. People still ask me if I ever regret what I did, exposing them, watching their lives fall apart. My answer is always the same. No, because what I did wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. Truth is what rebuilds you when love has broken you. But it's not a clean process. Healing is messy. Some days I still feel traces of anger, small flickers of resentment that catch me off guard. But they don't own me anymore. They visit, then leave. I used to think forgiveness meant letting them back into my heart. Now I know it just means no longer giving them space in my mind. Forgiveness is silent detachment, not reconciliation, and with that detachment comes power. One morning I received a letter. No return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Daniel's. It read, "Sera, I don't expect you to respond. I just want you to know I'm sorry. I've lost everything. My job, my reputation, Clara. I don't even know who I am anymore. But I think you were right. You didn't destroy me. I did. And I'll live with that. I hope you're happy. You deserve to be." I read it once, then again, and then I smiled. Not with spite, but with something softer. Because for the first time, he understood what I'd been trying to show him all along. Actions have consequences. I didn't reply. I folded the letter, set it on my balcony table, and let the ocean wind carry it away. Some words don't deserve to be kept. Life now is quieter. I teach, I write, I cook dinner for one and feel complete. I've learned that solitude isn't loneliness, it's clarity. It's space. It's peace. I've built a small circle of people who value honesty. People who don't demand perfection but understand presence. I laugh freely now. I sleep deeply. Every time I pass a mirror, I see a woman who survived being silenced, manipulated, and discarded, and turned that pain into armor. Not walls. I see someone who no longer needs to prove her worth to anyone. Sometimes, when the tide is low, I walk far out on the beach until the water just touches my ankles. I close my eyes and let the world fall away. I think about the girl I used to be, the one who believed that love meant loyalty at any cost. I want to tell her that she wasn't foolish for trusting. She was brave. Loving purely in a world full of deceit isn't weakness. It's strength. The kind that leaves scars, but also wisdom. If I could speak to her, I'd say, You will lose everything you thought defined you. And in that loss, you'll find yourself. Ava visited last weekend. We watched the sunset from my balcony, wine glasses in hand, laughter spilling over stories of old memories. She looked at me thoughtfully and said, "You know, Sera, for someone who went through hell, you seem at peace." I smiled. "Hell is what teaches you to appreciate peace," she laughed. "You should write that down." "I already did," I said quietly, "in my heart." Later that night, after she left, I lit a candle. The same vanilla scent that once filled the house I shared with Daniel. For a second, the smell transported me back, but instead of pain, I felt gratitude. That woman, the one who'd stood in that living room hearing her husband and best friend whisper about her. She had been broken, but she hadn't stayed that way. She had learned to rebuild, not for revenge, but for rebirth. And that's what this journey had been all along. Not vengeance, but resurrection. Standing by the open window, the flame flickering in the breeze, I whispered to myself, "You did it, Sera. You didn't just survive. You transformed." And I felt something deep inside me settle. This was closure. Not the kind that comes from an apology or justice, but the kind that comes from finally understanding that your pain no longer controls you. And if my story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that they too deserve respect and unconditional love. Because sometimes, the ones who walk away quietly aren't weak. They're just done explaining their worth. Have you ever had to rebuild yourself from the ashes of someone else's betrayal? If so, what did you learn about your own strength?